Hello, Ron. How are you doing?
I'm good. Good to see you.
Good to see you too, and I'm really pleased that we get to talk to each other, and it's a great opportunity, I think, and I'm really big fan of your work.
Same.
Perhaps what we can do is we can start by giving a few points from your CV. So basically, you are most famous for Euphoria, I think, and I'm personally a big fan, and I think it will be one of the projects that we'll be mostly talking about tonight, especially since the audience is going to watch the Israeli version of Euphoria, which is not that well known, actually, since most people have seen the HBO version. But you have also worked on No Man's Land, it's your project, and also Valley of Tears. There is on HBO Max. You have written lots of books that have been translated into many languages. You have won many awards. You have an Academy Award nomination for Before, a book that you wrote that you have adapted, and this is where I think you're particularly fun to talk to, is you're also a TV executive. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that first.
Yeah, I was going back and forth a bit from being an executive to writing, and when I'm writing, when I'm with the solitude and loneliness of being alone, that was, and especially with the books, that was too much for me, and I was missing the position of being an executive and creating with hundreds of people. And when I was an executive, I was missing the writing. So it's so good that we have television drama today that you can combine, because basically being a writer for television today gives you the ability to enjoy both. So I had the opportunity to be at Keshet as head of content and drama and entertainment for a few years, and it was the best school that I could ever dream of. But when we were at the Oscars with Buford, and after the ceremony, I was flying to the UK. I was on a train to Leeds, and I met like 20 students. I was just taking all this journey to meet 20 students to talk about a novel. And I realized that this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. So I was texting my boss and my friend Avinir and told him, listen, I want to be a writer and I need to leave. And he was very supportive.
That's great. That's great, because you did a great job there as well. I mean, you were working there for when they were doing Prisoners of War, which is of course Homeland, which I guess is one of the most successful series of the genre. So maybe we should talk a little about Euphoria. I mean, so for me, I mean, I'll try not to give you too many compliments, but for me, it's an extremely pertinent TV series, because the identity seeking part of youth, like teenage years, is very difficult to make truthfully, to make a honest and at the same time not glorifying. I sometimes have the impression that some of these youth series are very glorifying youth. You feel that they're older people talking about young people, and that they're glorifying something that is a very complicated, sometimes, time of life. And I found that Euphoria was hitting the spot. It was celebrating the innocence on one hand, but not glorifying the stupidity of youth and all the mistakes that we can make. So perhaps we can start by where Euphoria comes from, the original version.
We have to start maybe with the fact that when I'm asking myself, why do I write? And there's similarities between yourself and my writing, and I've been waiting to meet you, I think, for 10 years, and it's and the thing is, like, it's not only like the compassion and the way that you dealt, like 10 years ago, you dealt with things that are becoming again and again. You dealt with things that are becoming more relevant today. It was just foreseeing the future in many aspects, and you did that in such a sexy, compassionate way. But above all, I think both of us are really, unlike most writers, we use writing, correct me if I'm wrong, because we want to live other people's life and multiple lives, and in other words, to escape and to live in the skin of whoever we are drawn to. Usually, I can talk about myself, my alter ego. I use the writing to embark on a journey I've missed on, or people I want to feel. Writing is all about feeling empathy and the lack of empathy. I mean, if I think of what is wrong with the world today and what we want to fix, the number one issue is that people less and less feel empathy and the ability to imagine yourself as someone else and feel his suffering. And so I never, although when you go to a writing workshop, or when you meet an executive, especially an American executive, they would tell you, no, write about yourself. Write about yourself. You can't write about an American college kid if you haven't been at an American college. You won't understand the nuances. And what I love so much, by the way, about the dialogue with friends, I mean, with our French home, which is Orcor, and with Canal Plus and Arte, is the fact that they do believe in our ability to write someone who is my alter ego and not myself. I'm so passionate about I'm attracted. I'm sexually attracted to the characters who are not myself. So I want to be this person. So I'm passionate enough in order to want to write them and learn it and do the exploration and the research. And I'm doing a deep research in order to be able to speak a different language. Now, another reason why I think I wrote Euphoria, and also it's not only why I wrote it like 10 years ago, the first version, but also why I was so obsessed with fighting for 6.5 more years to continue this and to recreate it and to find people who would embrace it to another journey in other countries. It's also maybe because of the fact that when I approach an executive, again, especially in the US, people will always tell me, okay, so what's your next war story? So what's your next espionage story? I want to reinvent myself. And also with Euphoria, the idea was not only to write something that I never imagined that I will be able to create. I mean, when I started with the idea of, okay, what would I want to live in? I want to do some kind of a train spotting meet Gus Van Sant, Elephant, kids. And I have a kind of a vision of why do I want to do it and how. And I thought, oh, no one would ever allow me to create such a thing, of course. But the ideas, unlike other stories, it started for me with the ideas, with wanting to explore what it means to be 17. It started 2012, but it was about how the age of 17 is becoming the new 25, and being 40 is the new 25. So you're kind of stuck at the same place for so many years. And when you look at it in Israel and in other places, you look at kids who grow up with some kind of a flame of ideology, let's say religions, extremist religions. They have something that burns within inside them that gives them kind of a structure. But my community, as secular, liberal, urban 17-year-olds, I was trying to explore what they're coping with and the emptiness they sometimes need to create. And the basic idea was not to create realism, but to create emotional realism, and to see how the emotional realism means that how do we create a world that reflects the wishes of the characters that live inside it, you know.
But what I find magical in Euphoria, and maybe then we can continue to talk a little bit about the characters, but what I find really magical and okay, I have to make a disclaimer. I'm more drawn to the Israeli version just because I feel that the way the characters interact with each other is closer to me. And I feel that the American version is very, very violent, and it's a violence that I do believe exists, but I have not experienced myself, like a violent society, in that sense. But so let's talk a little bit about first the Israeli version of Euphoria, just in terms of characters, and then how you adapted them into the American versions of themselves. I mean, beyond the plot, which is also, of course, very different. But what I find very, very passionate, very, very interesting in your characters in Euphoria Israel version is that they can be very tough. Like in one scene, they can be very, very violent to each other, verbally speaking, very cruel. And then in a very subtle way, it becomes extremely tender, very generous, very heartfelt. And then you bring us back to this really cruel, like only young people can be cruel like that towards each other thing. So perhaps you can talk a little bit about that, and then how you adapted that to the American reality.
Wow. So, okay, thanks. First of all, yes, I completely agree with the fact that when we are creating teenagers on television, it always was either a comedy. Like, by the way, when we came with Euphoria to the US and every network said no to it, 20 networks and outlets said no to it, those who said yes said, but let's make it more of a skins. It needs to be skins. And we didn't want to do something that had been done beautifully. But the idea was not to create, on the one hand, not to create the comedy, but not to create also the artificial or didactic way. When you create, unlike films, and it's incredible because a film, sometimes, there are great films that will hold on the shoulders of a 17 or 15 or 13-year-old lead character. But on television, whenever you see a show that is leaning on one or in a group of teenagers, it is considered a teen drama. So executive would say no to it. They would not. And that reflects something much deeper, the fact that television doesn't treat 17-year-old in a mature way. And our idea was, let's deal with mental health issues. Let's deal with sexual fluidity. Let's deal with loneliness and the absence of parenthood. Let's deal with so many emotional addictions that Sam Levinson, the brilliant Sam Levinson, who is creating the American version, was bringing into the story. And the idea was to treat them more maturely. That's one major thing, and this is where it started, and that's why it was a journey that we always got the no to. And now, and another thing is, being a 17 changed a lot. It changes every year. I mean, being a teenager changes, and the things we wanted to say back then are different. We grew up. You are changing all the time, but also, when you're creating an Israeli version, there are things that are, our budget in Israel is something like 10% of a European budget for a show. And in this case, it was 1% of an American budget show. So you can only do 20 scenes per episode, for example. Now, we wanted to create in this aspect 100 scenes per episode because of the short attention, to capture the short attention of this generation. And we couldn't in an Israeli budget. So there are a lot of things we really wanted to do in the Israeli originally in 2012 or 11 that we couldn't. And we knew we need to continue fighting for it. And then, so when we arrived to American executives, and by the way, for me, I was dreaming of creating a Dutch version and a French version, and not necessarily. It wasn't all about the U.S. But when we arrived, and what happens when 20 when you first look for a home for a producer, and 20 or 30 producers say no, and then the 32nd one who comes, you would say yes, because you're already thinking, well, no one would ever take it. And sometimes you're getting into bed with the wrong production company. And that's something that I've learned along the way, how crucial this is, not only in the eyes of the network or the platform, but also in the eyes of the screen wise. I mean, the producer is your artistic partner. And if and we gave Euphoria as an option for a few years to a production studio that is doing huge American films, but not this DNA. They can do superheroes, but they're not doing this DNA. And when we entered the room at HBO, for example, and HBO said no, a lot of it was because we weren't in the right package. And I never understood that. When we came with the right, when Casey Blois got the job of, he was head at HBO, he was head of comedy, and then he jumped 2 sets in like 1 month. And he remembered watching the Israeli tape, and he said, I want to create something like this. I want to create Euphoria. And the first thing he said, besides bringing Sam Levinson, was, we need a home that will capture the DNA. And A24 is that home. They already did Moonlight. They already did Lady Bird. So a lot of the dialogue, and that's what's so beautiful about adaptations. I guess we'll talk about adaptations later, but that's the thing about creating a package. You're not holding all of this on your back like a bag of huge rocks, and you're lonely with it. But if you have the right partners, you find the themes, you find the mood board. And the amazing thing about Sam, when Sam approached the story, well, everyone would always talk about how he brought his own experience as a kid who was suffering from addiction from the age of 11. But there's anyone who loves the show had read about it, I guess. But and that's true. He brought this incredible, rich personal experience. But as a brilliant filmmaker, he brought so much more. The dialogue, and I've learned a lot. When he brought the mood board, and he was trying to bring his inspirations. The incredible thing was, just as you grew up in Hungary, so I'd say one major influence he brought of lightning and atmosphere was the Hungarian film Time Stands Still, who captures the 60s, like being a teenager in Hungary in the 60s. It's a movie from '82. I mean, he was so brilliant in bringing, let's go to Magnolia and Boogie Nights and learn about how the camera moves and the empathy towards the characters. He brought a stills photographer named Todd Hido from Ohio that captures portraits of urban, rotten urban life. And he said, okay, the neon lighting. Well, I mean, the idea, the guidelines that he created, while reinventing and still keeping the DNA that we came and pitched, because we were fighting for 6 years with a DNA that says this is the show, and if you want to create skins, we're not selling the show. So
I see.
It was an interesting process.
I mean, I think that's, in terms of visual storytelling and, camera work and actually everything, all the plastic, parts of the show are absolutely stunning and extremely ambitious. I mean, it is very much hybrid, and it's also very much diverse, but there is a unity in the diversity. I mean, it sounds like a political party pitch now, but there is unity in diversity, and I find that extremely interesting. But maybe can you talk a little bit about, just into more there's a screenwriting detail, how were you involved in the adaptation? What was your level of involvement, and how was it as an experience?
Okay, so that's two questions, I guess. First of all, I'll just say about adaptations and being involved in adaptation. I have friends who are brilliant filmmakers. Most of them came from cinema, and when they're creating a show, and this show is being adapted sometimes to 20 different versions, from Korea to South Africa to India to Russia, they're so obsessed with being involved in each and every word. And if someone changes something, they get anxious. And when I tell them, no, I mean, the one thing I love is making sure that we are attached to the most talented people who I am attracted to their work, and I'm excited about their interpretation, and I'm curious about what kind of interpretation they will bring into the table. At that point, I'm not obsessed anymore. And they look at me, and I guess some of you will look at me and say, well, so you're less of an artist. An artist must be obsessed with every word. And I say, well, I mean, or they're saying, oh, so this story is not that important for you if you are letting go and allowing someone else. When I write a show and it is done in Korea, or it is done in the US, or by a director in Israel even, and this guy brings his own interpretations, of course, there will be a lot of things that weren't my choices. But I embrace this, and I feel fortunate, and I feel blessed that this art can be done as a collaboration, and people will bring their own interpretation. I'm curious to see what they will bring to the table. So yes, I love reading the scripts and giving notes and watching the cats, but I'm really fortunate to have someone so talented lead this. At the same time, I want to reinvent myself. For a while, I've been living inside the bodies of 17-year-olds when I wrote this show. Now I want to find a new storytelling or a new theme or explore new worlds. And that relates to two other things you've said about yourself. And again, I really find a resemblance. It's incredible because, first of all, I've never, unlike Sam who brought his own experience, I was never this teenager, but I've never been, doing all this drugs and whatever. And it's even, Israel is when at the age of 21, and it's such a tiny country, you are being suffocated and it's closed and closing itself more and more behind the borders and the walls and whatever. So you just take an airplane to somewhere and just walk for a year. South America, Asia, if you are more of a nerd, you're going to Australia, whatever. But you basically travel for a year. And I didn't do that when I was 21 because I was too eager to start my career and I was a spoiled kid and I couldn't imagine myself missing my mother for a year. But when I was 28, I thought, well, maybe I missed the most exciting things of my life. I will always have a chance to be 50, but when I was 21, I didn't act as a 21. They're all running around naked in the coca fields of Bolivia and doing drugs and sex all day, and I'm not. So I said, no, now I'm going at 28. And I just flew to Bolivia, to the death road, leading to Rurrenabaca, to the jungles, to the Amazon. And it was beautiful, like Europe is beautiful, but I wasn't the guy running around naked in the coca fields of Bolivia and doing drugs all day. So I took a plane back, it was to Rome, and sealed myself in a dark room with a frozen air condition, opened my laptop and started writing about running around naked on the coca fields of Bolivia, and it was much more passionate. I would always the experience will be more emotional and more edgy when I write it. So this is why I was writing this 17-year-olds in order to explore the life I never had for myself. Like I've never been a combat soldier, but I was writing combat soldiers because I wanted to know I've tried, but to understand what they were going through and the insanity in them. So the thing is, I think the other side of it is when you mentioned the traveling as your drug. And I think for me, when I'm trying to write, a technique that I use when I want it, because writing basically that's a lot of technical work in a sense. So I wake up at 5:20 in the morning and I just write. But when I need an inspiration to burst, I take a plane to a place I've never been to. It can be a city I've never been to in China, for example. And I just lose my way. I just start walking and I walk for 6 to 10 hours without knowing where I go. I don't have a map. I don't have anything. I'm just walking. And I have a note with the name of the hotel where in case I don't find an English-speaking taxi driver. And this is the way I try to think. And the reason I use it is not only because I feel when I'm in a place I feel like a nomad, and I don't relate to this. I love being a foreigner, alien in a place, but also I fall in love again with the human species, with the human race. But also it's about the fact that with all the short attention that we have around us, every single thought that we have today is cut after 20 seconds. You start thinking about an idea, and less than a minute later, you have a text message, you have an email, someone is bothering you. And while walking for 6 hours, you get an opportunity to have a thought that will last for 6 hours sometimes. That's the thing I'm trying to achieve.
No, I think it's fascinating to listen to because, from a philosophical point of view, how as a writer, you intertwine reality and fiction in the sense of, like, I'm not talking now about writing a story where reality is intertwined with fiction, but how in your soul as a human being, you're intertwining reality and fiction where, you go to a place with expectations of what reality is going to be like, get disappointed, go to another place and write a fiction about the reality that you wanted to have but didn't get. And then when you're bored, you go to a reality where you don't know anything. It's such a fascinating process. I mean, it's it reminds me a little bit. I know and it's not an obsession, but kind of, the way, you wrote the scenes, some of the dialogues and scenes in Euphoria that, the audience was seeing, it is kind of like that kind of spiral or that kind of journey where you start with something, you see how far you can go, and then you go back, to initial point, and it has a kind of like a natural conclusion. And so, the other thing, and of course, there is something about the need to lose oneself to be able to write. I think that there is not just one way of losing. Like, some people take drugs. I mean, it's not for nothing. Many artists throughout history took a lot of drugs. Regardless. But another subject that we were talking about earlier is how television changes and how the spectators change, and how they are more and more interested in local content that is not from cultures that they have visited, and kind of a journey thus, in a way that maybe many people cannot allow themselves the freedom that, you and I maybe can sometimes. So how the spectators change and how the industry changes in terms of, different cultures and different contents. Could you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think for television, this is the most fascinating time in history, because the change that we are going through is not just, switching to color, from black and white to color TV. It's a much deeper thing. And for a long time, we were very anxious, all of us, to get the answer to one question that was always in the background, and we were always kind of fearful of. The question was, at the end of the day, would there be one Netflix, like there's one Google, like there's one I don't know, YouTube, or will they be a lot of streamers? And for a while, it looked like, okay, there's going to be one Netflix, because they were smart and beautifully smart in creating a situation where young people, when they chat on Tinder, on their profile, they say, looking for someone to Netflix with. It just turned into a verb.
Fantastic.
And at the same time, when we got in 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, we finally got the answer. There won't be just one Netflix. There will truly be an American, and Americans are quite conservative, and it takes time for them to adapt. But even today, an American home would have an average of 4 different streaming services. And that's a huge thing. And when that created, on the one hand, it creates something that is full of hope for all of us as creators and as consumers, as an audience and art. And at the same time, it is a huge challenge, because the US is creating 495 drama series a year. 490 of them will just disappear, like they will, without an essence, probably. And what you are fighting is not to be made, to be produced. You are fighting to not to be forgotten. I mean, you're fighting not to disappear in a huge, endless, scrolling of stuff. And therefore, you need to create something that brings a unique voice. You have to explore things that will stand out, that no one had noticed before. You have to reinvent storytelling. And on the other hand, this competition killed creativity, because there are not enough a generation of executives. Netflix themselves create now more than the entire industry was creating together before. And there were not enough new executives that know how to read scripts. So the executives had tons of things to read every day and night. And they're afraid of saying a wrongful no or green light the wrong projects. And it creates an industry that is really loyal to algorithms, and they have they have this mandate report that says what are we looking for this year. Every station, every outlet, what they're looking for this year, and it creates sometimes like 495 shows that are the same thing. And the shows that are successful eventually are the most successful are those who went against all the algorithms, the shows that everyone said no to. even think that you would say, why would people say no to Stranger Things? It was the most successful show at Netflix at the time, but 20-something networks said no to it, exactly like our case with Euphoria. And that happens because when you do bring something that feels fresh and stands out and outstanding, then it will be irresistible. It will be irresistible for the audience because it will feel different. And I think this is the first reason out of many, but two major reasons. This is the first reason why when you're creating a show that gets out of the bubble of American characters on American soul, speaking American language with an American story. Suddenly you bring them a show from Paris, a few shows from, you know what, when Casa de Papel was successful, everyone said, okay, yes, but the Americans, they're used to hearing Spanish, but they're not getting open to getting content from abroad. But the reality was different because, yes, the Americans loved Casa de Papel. They hear Spanish as a second language. And also, young people are capable of reading subtitles. When we do shows, when we sell shows to the US, the elderly population would watch it dubbed, but the young generations would watch subtitles, partly because they're used to, even they have such a disorder of OCD and noise, and they watch even the English-speaking shows that Gen Z is watching with subtitles, so they're used to reading subtitles. Now, originally, the industry was always about America creating American shows and then selling it to 200 territories and not really knowing these territories. And the crazy thing, which is the opportunity for all of us as European executives, as European creators, is that, and we were as creators, if you were in Sweden, you would creating for the local national television, and you never had the urge to fly away with your show out of Sweden or out of Tokyo. And for the first time this past few years, we are becoming a community of creators that is very globalized. The world is becoming nationalist again in many aspects, and people are fighting against it. But we as a community, for the first time, you had that in the film industry a bit, but in the television industry, it's the first time that we're truly becoming a community. We know now the executives and creators in South America, in Asia, all around Asia, in Africa, China, whatever, and the US, of course, and of course in Europe. It's a small community. And now for the first time, we have the ability to create together. When we created with Orcor and Arte, No Man's Land, and they were in Fremantle, of course, it was all about creating a community of filmmakers from 10 different countries, speaking 8 different languages, creating a show together. And I think in many ways, this is the future, not from a moral, valuable reason, but this what feels to the American screen are the foreign shows. And there is a reason why Lupin was the most watched on Netflix for a while, although it's a French series. It's not, and I mean, it's suddenly you find yourself with so much content that is brilliantly successful, that comes from Europe and from other places, and the American audience is. But the other reason, the last reason, would be the fact that all these new players like Disney Plus with Fox and Hulu and everything inside it, and all the new players, they know that more than 66% of the new subscribers would come from overseas. So they need to have local content. Sometimes it's in English speaking, sometimes not, but you do. And so it is changing not only the industry, it is changing the way we tell stories in a good way. It is opening the most extraordinary experience that for us as writers, that we have the ability to create something we had never done before. And so even Hollywood is more open than ever. To it.
I'm struggling to understand how, while there is this opening and, clearly an interest of seeing different perspectives, and other cultures and other ways and other stories and other characters. How can this at the same time be simultaneous to a rise of nationalism absolutely everywhere? I mean, I know that this is maybe not a subject that is so much tied to Euphoria, but for me, it feels like schizophrenic. It feels like, on one hand we want this, but on the other hand we are so afraid. I don't understand. So I don't know. I don't know if you've thought about this. But
well, I'm very worried and pessimistic. So you won't find you can. I mean, here's the thing. I think one of the huge dangers that we are facing these days is worldwide is the death of truth, and the social media would eventually will not. In many aspects, I think democracies will have a hard time to survive as long as we don't have regulations on social media. The thing is that until 10 years ago, there was a news editor who would tell you these are the most truthful and important things to know. And he had this kind of a Bible of laws and moral obligation and ethics that was that was kind of guarding what we knew or what. And in a sense, the fact that in the US, for example, if 80% of Republicans, for example, even today are convinced that the elections was rigged, 80%, they believe this is truth. Although 400 courts that were appointed by Republicans say it wasn't, it means that down the road, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, we will be facing a catastrophe because people will always, human beings, and that's the problem with our profession as well, human beings will always choose to believe a good story and not the truth. And they will always choose to believe a story that plays on their nerve endings and their fears and their emotions and not the truth. Now, for me, the way when I write, and your work was also very emotional, but also very political. And for me, I mean, the truth is that drama is not art, and it will never be art unless it puts a mirror up to its audience and forces the audience and the writer to look at our reflection and feel troubled. And this is the reason why we write. We write because we want to work art. We need to believe that art transforms the world with the truth, and we are working out our grief and our rage and our wounded hope and deep desires, and just to awaken people. And this is what we do. And at the same time, we escape to writing drama because drama comes with great solace. I mean, every disaster plays a role. I mean, it doesn't happen. Evil in drama it has its purpose. It doesn't occur in the random banality of evil in real life. It makes an effort to remain within sufferable boundaries, right? And it obeys its own law and order that if you listen to a lot of drama or if you know the drama rules, you know what's coming. And at the right moment, it compensates the reader or the audience for the journey they've sacrificed to be with you emotionally.
Yeah.
So
evil follows plot points.
yeah, exactly. Evil follows plot points, and that's something that helps me escape from the awful reality outside to it. Now, when things go wrong in the world, executives have the urge to try and feel that they're doing something as well. I mean, they are creating the Handmaid's Tale to shout what is most important for them. So we do have a chance to talk about the things that bother you and politically and create them. And yes, I mean, the issue with globalization and it is power nationalism. It's part. I'm fearful that we are heading this way. Of course, it doesn't happen in one direction. It is more of a kind of a sinus wave and going back and forth. And partly with the economic. I mean, financially wise, as a business, television needs to expand to India. Hulu needs to get. Disney needs to be a major player in India. So it is creating a kind of and the fact that we are in many ways, we are a brand. We are Starbucks. We are creating a drama, and it is being adopted in other. It is now it's in Tokyo, and now it's in Korea, and now it's in South Africa. It doesn't mean that we are becoming more. It's democracy is strengthening. It doesn't mean that we're doing. So it is going in all directions. I think it's good that we have our tool to fight for what we believe. And again, as we said, it's about compassion and it's about empathy. That's the writing. So as long as we get a chance, we fight for those themes.
I think that I would differentiate maybe between like, for example, The Handmaid's Tale, which is clearly like a political story that is very important to tell today because of the parallels with modern society, and it's science fiction, and so you can imagine like an extrapolation of problems that are existing in society today. But what I find, like, personally, on a personal level, and this will be a very nice segue back to Euphoria. What I think that is also important is to look for emotional truth, when we write our characters. And for me, I'm a huge fan of Miyazaki in general, and his storytelling and the characters, where everyone is bad and everyone is good. Like if you look at, Princess Mononoke, I mean, where is the problem coming from? Why is it that it's like this? And it's like a snake that is eating its tail. And that is a very simple, so to speak, kind of story, but that holds in itself the complexity of a situation that gives pause for thought while being entertained. And I think that for me, that is really, really the way that I think that we can influence our spectators in a good way. It doesn't matter. It can be like set in the Ozarks, or like in Missouri, or it can be set in a kibbutz in Israel, or in the northern Sweden. And all those stories have to be adapted to cultural differences, and they have to be, relevant. They have to have like roots, strong roots that grow in the soil where you're setting your step. But we can all learn from Master Miyazaki, in the sense that, we can create that kind of moral dilemmas where, you look for evil, and evil it's because the situation, because the circumstance, and, everyone is trying to kind of find a way out of it, but at the same time breeding it, and so this brings us back to Euphoria, where I find that the characters, their arcs in general for the entire season, they have this endless battle with themselves, and this not good and evil, but they are trying to find their way, and also within each scene where they're navigating between being mean to each other and being generous to each other and being poetic and being very full on and so on. So I guess my question would be like, this emotional truth, if we can call it that, and how you relate to that within the first version of Euphoria.
In the Israeli version of Euphoria, the idea was that we have 100% absence of parents. You don't see a mature character. There will always be a note on the refrigerator or a shoulder. You will never see a parent. And these kids are all, there's something that unites these characters, the kids, the teenagers. They were all present when a teenager was killed in a nightclub, and they're all bringing their own kind of trauma, post-trauma, into their soul, and each of them struggles with the post-trauma differently. You don't know that when you start watching the first and second episode, but you get to that really soon, and then and they're becoming a kind of an urban community. They're not a kibbutz, but they're a commune on a rooftop with a jacuzzi full of beer on a rooftop near Tel Aviv. And the idea was creating a commune, and they are living together, a kind of a commune. So at that point, because they are post-traumatized, in a way, you can forgive them for things they're doing. And at the same time, I know that we are all, like, since even, I think, Oz, but also, of course, from The Sopranos, we were always talking about how important it is for the characters on the new television era not to be lovable, but to be relatable. And of course, they must be relatable. You have to understand why they're doing what they're doing. But I'm not afraid to say I want them lovable as well, even if they're. I mean, if I want them to be lovable and at the same time to be bad at times, but I want to understand where it's coming from. And sometimes it is bad in a sexy way, and sometimes a sexual way, and because they're teenagers, it's easier to forgive them, but also to realize how whatever you're doing when you're 17 will influence your entire life. And they do that with a lot of sense of humor and a lot of and sensitivity in a way, and they're very lonely. So you feel this. I hope you feel this compassion towards them. But of course, emotional realism is the number one rule in this format that doesn't have a lot of rules, because basically, as much as we work, if I'm writing espionage, I would use a lot of the drama structure. I feel that sometimes the Bible of the idea of the drama structure that is with us for thousands of years is sacred. I mean, I would always obey the rules. I love the 3 acts structure. But when we came to Euphoria, we went against all rules. We didn't build it with the algorithm of drama, of course not with a beat sheet of Save the Cat. But even Sam, that was in the US version, you get to a point where the drama starts growing up to be a drama, a plot-wise drama from after 4 episodes. But at the beginning, it is more of the journey, and the atmosphere is going against a lot of rules of the drama. But at the same time, for example, after a very tough first episode of a first journey, you get to a point where you get the compassion and the empathy at this ending scenes when Rue and Jules are riding a bike together and she puts her hand on her and you see, well, she found love. She found the best friend. She found love. And you get a treat you get a compensation for being invested in this very tough journey. In a way, when we started doing the Israel Euphoria, a lot of the things we did back then where people say, well, that will never happen. Even, by the way, all the hookup apps on the, people say, well, there will never be a Tinder. I mean, the girls will never use dating app for hookups or for sex. And so it was at that point, and when the Israel Euphoria was aired on cable, on HOT, it's the Israeli leading cable networks, and the government ministry that is supervising HOT was going with all power against the show, and let's put aside the fact that the parliament, when they were meeting to talk about the show, said things like, why can't you do a show about how beautiful our teenagers are and they're doing good, they're good-hearted, but they decided not to allow us to air the episodes before 10 p.m., but even not to air promo before 10 p.m., and even not to have it on VOD on the streaming service before 10 p.m. every night. So we had to take it out of the VOD every day and put it back after 10 p.m. And it was, and they were all going around, and the show was not green-lighted to a second season. And at that point, I said, well, and because I had another show with my writing partner Amit Cohen, we had another show that was the Gordian Cell, that at the time was adapted to Korean, and we were traveling together to Korea, and it was great working with the local creators and I said, well, yeah, we weren't green-lighted for a second season for Euphoria, and I can't let these characters die. I need to find a way to relive it. I'm still attracted to living in this world. So why not dream of having Euphoria in other countries and have more Euphoria? And it's even more interesting for me than any espionage show. It's more interesting for me than adapting a show about a Russian spy in Israel turning it to a North Korean spy in South Korea. In this aspect, I want to see how being a teenager in Sweden looks like, and in what ways this is different than and in what way it's not. So
okay, so why don't you come to Sweden and we'll do a Swedish story? No problem, we do it.
let's do it.
All right. So Ron, thank you so much for your time. This was really, really great. Thank you, Série Series and Marie in particular for making this happen. I had a great time. I hope all the spectators had the same. So, Ron, I hope that we'll meet you in real life when the COVID situation is over, and that maybe Série Series next year. Who knows?
Yeah, for sure. Looking forward to it. Thanks for everything, David.